I'm Brett Hayworth, and welcome to What's a Frequency, our weekly show on Siouxland Public Media. Since June 2024, we've had several shows and newscasts devoted to the severe flooding that impacted northwest Iowa and southeast South Dakota. That's when such rivers as the Big Sioux in the Sioux City metro area and the Little Sioux and other places such as Spencer, Iowa, Correctionville, etc., had many homes that were impacted, businesses were impacted, and many important places. Some of those are museums that throughout Siouxland. This What's a Frequency show is devoted to looking back at the flooding on the northwest edge of Sioux City at the Sioux City Railroad Museum, which got extensive water damage. Lots of portions of the grounds got inundated, and we're going to hear from Museum President Larry Obermeyer. So thank you for being here today, Larry.
Well, thank you, Brett, for inviting me.
To begin, let's set the scene. So some people who are hearing this may not have been to the Sioux City Railroad Museum. So just describe where it is in proximity to Interstate 29. I know it's pretty close to North Sioux City, South Dakota as well, but yeah, just where it is.
Yeah, the Sioux City Railroad Museum occupies an area that used to be the repair shops for the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway. It's located right along the Big Sioux River, just north of the Military Road Bridge, and then where the railroad bridge into South Dakota is. So it's right at that kind of a juncture point. So on the other side of the river is, of course, South Dakota, and then we're located on the Iowa side. And it's about 2 miles from Interstate 29.
Right. And again, more for you, Larry Obermeyer, to kind of set the scene as well. I believe you got really interested in railroads because of your father's occupation. So tell me his work experience in Sioux City for different railways or railroad systems. And we'll do that first, and then we'll have another question.
Yeah, I'm what you would call a railroad brat. My dad worked for the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, as well as what was known as the Omaha Road, and they merged together in the late 50s. But he worked for the railroad for 37 years. He started working for the railroad when he was 14. He was able to, at that time period, lie about his age and get hired out on the railroad, and until he had a stroke in the mid-1980s. He worked for the railroad as a yardmaster, conductor, brakeman, switch foreman, and then he was a legislative representative for the local union.
Okay. And what would you say would be the heyday for railroads in Sioux City? Whether it's in the so we're talking about the Riverside area where the museum is, but then there's also like down through the stockyards, et cetera. What was from the 18 whatevers through when roughly?
Yeah, I would say the heyday of the railroads here in Sioux City was from about 1890 to around 1945. So right through the both world wars. The actual peak year for the railroads was about 1948. And that's when you saw the railroads moving away from steam locomotives to diesel locomotives, and passenger train service started to decline with the coming of the automobile and the airplane industry. So that golden age just really started to decline post-World War II.
And then for the Sioux City, for that portion of Riverside, where would things be shipped, and what sorts of things would be shipped to and from Sioux City?
Well, the Riverside area, that repair shop handled the railroad's locomotives and rail cars that would be traveling from Chicago to Aberdeen out to the Pacific Northwest. It was built right about the middle of their system, so it was built as their second largest repair terminal. So it did a lot of work for the railroad. When it reached its peak in 1948, the complex would shop about 35 steam locomotives every day, which means they completely overhauled 35 steam locomotives a day. And then they would service another 70 to 100 locomotives with fuel, coal, water, and sand, which were all important components to powering the locomotives. But then there was also the car shops area where they would overhaul and repair over 10,000 rail cars a year. And the employment was about 565 men and women every day.
Wow. So you and I over the years have had various talks. We know each other socially, and we're actually worked together for a few years, and other stories I've done in the past. But I don't know that I've ever known the breadth of all that was happening at that point. That's impressive.
Yeah, and that's just one railroad. When you look at Sioux City's railroad history, there were six what they called trunk line railroads, which generally the railroads originated in Chicago and then headed out west or to the Twin Cities. So each of those railroads then had a shop here. So there was six major shops, just like the one we're preserving in Riverside. But not only that, we had large scale stations and depots. We were a railroad hub. We were a hub terminal for these six railroads. And, the employment at that time was about 10% of the population worked for the railroad.
Wow. Of this, like Sioux City Metro or the
Yeah,
area?
Sioux City Metro, about 10% of the population worked for the railroad.
Gosh. Okay. So thank you for kind of setting the scope of the heyday for the railroad, so to speak, I guess, as we just talked about it. So tell me now, so once that heyday was passed, and then when did the idea to create the museum come to you, and what were the grounds like at that stage? I think it was the 1990s, perhaps?
Yeah, we gave birth to our preservation society, is how we term it, in 1984, to restore to the steam locomotive that used to be behind the auditorium in downtown. And then we knew that we would need a facility that would have to take care of that locomotive once it was restored. So we started looking at the Milwaukee Railroad shops in Riverside to see if there was potential for us to acquire that facility and develop it into a railroad museum. Well, that didn't happen till 1995, thanks to the city providing a HUD grant to us to purchase the complex. We were able to do that. And it had been abandoned by the railroad. It was very much a blighted area. There was a lot of decay and deterioration of the buildings, no windows left or anything. It was completely a junkyard. It had been used as a junkyard as well. So the city was really considering razing all the buildings and just letting the land be taken over by shrub and everything, let nature reclaim it. But then we came in, my dad and I, with the idea of preserving the site for a railroad museum.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Larry Obermeyer. Back for this episode of What's Your Frequency? We're talking about the Sioux City Railroad Museum. There was severe flooding last year as lots of Siouxland was damaged by June 2024 flooding. The Railroad Museum in Sioux City was one of those places, and we're talking with Larry Obermeyer about that. So one more description, I guess, of the grounds out there. How close is it to the river, and what is on the grounds? Like, what does the museum currently have before this flooding came?
What the museum currently has is the landscape of the museum is about 30 acres. And within that 30 acres, there's 15 acres that houses the roundhouse and a couple other historic buildings. The site is on the National Register of Historic Places. So as far as the river is directly abutting to the Railroad Museum grounds. So we have what we call an agricultural archaeological field that separates the river from the historical core. So that covers about 15 acres at archaeological field, and then the historic field itself is about 15 acres.
And that's kind of a buffer from the river to the grounds. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it's a buffer. How I best describe it is it was basically area that was pretty much untouched for a long time, even though the railroad was out there and graded parts of it for its construction camps during the 1916-1918 period. For the most part, that area was just left to grow and be a natural green space.
Okay. And had the grounds at the museum, since it became a museum again, starting back in the 1990s, or when you started carrying that out, has it flooded in over these last 30 years since then?
Yeah, we experienced flooding in 2011 with the Missouri Big Sioux River flood. Then in 2013 and 2014, we had flooding. And then 2019 was, of course, a big year for flooding on the Big Sioux. But the agricultural field during all of those floods, was able to absorb all the water, and it didn't allow the water to come up into the historical core. But then 2024 was just a totally different flood. It was a millennial flood.
So take us back to what you were watching as far as any forecasts, because I want to say June 19th, June 20th, maybe the 18th, 19th, and 20th. Like, did you know what were you seeing in the forecast, and were you worried that perhaps there could be an impact on the museum grounds?
Yeah, TJ, our executive director, and I began watching the weather forecast around June 17th, June 18th. We were seeing there was heavy rains out west, and we kind of saw how they were, the weather service was going to track that storm. And we saw that just north of Sioux City could be heavily impacted. And based on our experience before with snow melts up north, we knew that it could be a danger point for us. So TJ really started following the forecast on Friday, June 21st. And of course, by that time, we had learned that there was anywhere from 12 inches to 20 inches of rain that fell along the Big Sioux River Valley. And we have to remember that the watershed for the Big Sioux River is over 9,000 square miles. So that's a really big area that has to drain. And you have 3 to 5 rivers and major creeks that flow into the Big Sioux as well. So we were really watching what was happening. And then we made the decision on Saturday night, on the 22nd, which was my birthday. So I keep telling people I'm as old as Noah, so I delivered a flood on my birthday. But we knew we would need to do something the next day. So we called out for volunteers, made Facebook posts, seeking individuals to help us sandbag, seal up the buildings, because we were anticipating that we would get some major water throughout the complex. We did not expect what we were seeing at 4:00 in the afternoon.
Was the brunt of it on Sunday or Monday, Tuesday? What I can't.
The brunt of it happened on Sunday,
Okay.
between about 1 and 11 o'clock that night. We started staking out from the river, as closest to the river as we could get. Every 20 feet, we would have stakes in the ground to measure how fast the water was moving in. And by 1 o'clock, the speed of the water it would cover 20 feet about every 5 minutes. And then it just started picking up more and more. Then around 6 o'clock, the police were coming, telling our volunteers that we had to evacuate, that there was just water coming down from the north, and they didn't really know how much would be coming down. So they told us we had to evacuate, and it was hard. I'm seeing volunteers crying and we had done our last bit of what we could with sandbagging, and it was just really, really emotional to see that they were losing the battle. And when you have volunteers that are from across the region and from the community, that's the one thing most people don't really anticipate is what's the impact on the volunteers that create these historic sites and keep them going. It was just hard to see them crying, and they knew they were losing the battle. And it was especially when we started to see equipment and like propane tanks and our storage containers being lifted by all this volume of water. And this stuff was floating away. And then, for 5 hours, we saw nothing but one big long line of corn stalks. And they were all coming upon the Railroad Museum. And that's a lot of force that came. We saw trees and timber hitting the railroad bridge, which, of course, we know. It took down the railroad bridge. We were fortunate the buildings were able to withstand the pressure, but just to give you an idea of the velocity of the water that came down, the Corps of Engineers and the National Weather Service, their monitoring equipment quit about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The river had totally submerged their monitoring equipment by the bridge, the military road bridge, and at the time it quit working, it was measuring the volume or the velocity of the water at 98,000 cubic feet per second. So then the National Weather Service, directly across from the Railroad Museum on the South Dakota side, they set up a temporary monitoring apparatus, and it was measuring the water velocity at 170,000 CFS. And when you think of all of that timber that's coming down and corn stalks and everything coming down the river and hitting the bridge, I mean, it was hitting us too.
Sure.
I mean, our fence bent, buckled. It was pretty bad and devastating.
I guess, first of all, thank you. That I think of all the river reporting that I've done in the 15 months since, I don't know that I've had someone describe like the speed and pace of the river and I guess the force that is coming down. What I was about to say, and I think that for context, the Big Sioux River hit an all-time high, and it not only hit an all-time high in Sioux Lane, but I think it exceeded like 7 to 8 feet. I think the new was it 47 feet was the new recorded high.
Yeah, it exceeded the 2019 flood by 7 feet. So if you were to have a visual of the bottom of the river to the top of the levee, which was underwater, you're talking a height that's taller than a 3-story building.
Yeah.
And for the Railroad Museum, the archaeological field was under anywhere from 10 to 12 feet of water. As you moved closer to the historic core, it was 8 to 10 feet of water. And then when you look at the satellite imagery now that's available of that period of flooding from June 23rd to June 27th, it looks like there's just one big Great Lake extending from Akron to Sioux City.
Wow. Okay, and before, so now we're going to talk about the impact of the flooding, what all was impacted, but I do want to make sure I ask so people know, when you say the buildings that were hit, are these stone buildings or like, what are they constructed of, the buildings?
Their facades are brick masonry. Their roof structures are made of timber and wood planking, and then of course the interiors, if there is a floor, they're either a cement floor or like the car shop building, it's a tongue and groove wood floor.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. And we're back for more of this episode of What's the Frequency on the Sioux City Museum being flooded in the severe flooding that happened in June 2024 and the bounce back that's happened there. I'm talking with Sioux City Railroad President Larry Obermeyer. So now we're to the point where like the floodwaters have hit. So describe, I guess, the impact of the buildings and what was in each building and what was impacted in terms of displays and such.
Well, every building, the Roundhouse building, which is the major signature building out there, it's 6 stalls and it's a large sheltered work area, houses the Holocaust Rails exhibit. That exhibit was totally inundated with about 6 feet of water, extensive damage to the electronic system, the graphic design panels and everything. And then as you come out of the Holocaust Rails exhibit, you have where we have equipment, large-scale equipment, steam locomotive, 2 steam locomotives on display, rail cars, and they're all submerged underwater. And then you see your artifact displays are floating in the water. Of course, the water got through every little hole it could and really submerged everything in the interior of all the buildings. And you have that, like I said, that strong velocity of water that it could just penetrate wherever it could and fill up the interior of their buildings. So you also had the water sitting in those buildings before it all receded out. It took 72 hours to recede out.
3 days, basically.
3 days. So you have all this environmental stuff now that's starting to happen with off-gassing from the water, evaporation. So that's all floating in your atmosphere inside the building. It's getting into your HVAC system. It's distributing mold on the drywall. And, I mean, just as the water was receding, you saw the mold starting to grow on the drywall. And there is one other point I want to make is the water was not clean.
Yeah.
It was heavily contaminated. The city of Sioux Falls released raw sewage into the water, over 40 million gallons of raw sewage. And then you had other communities along the river that did it too. They had no other choice. And then you have these agricultural lands that have manure on them and chemicals that have been used to fertilize and everything. That's all in this water. And so we have to be careful during the cleanup with our volunteers. Are they properly taken care of for protective gear and everything like that? So, and then you got debris just strewn all over, and the debris's contaminated.
And Larry, was there a dollar figure for the impact of the museum in terms of like insurance and things of that nature?
Yeah, the structural damage to the historic buildings and to the artifact display cases and everything totaled $2 million. But now what we're seeing is the residual that's happening even a year later and will probably continue for 2 years. It's that environmental that is once again coming up and hitting us. We're losing our trees. The trees are dying from the inside out, from the disease and contamination of the water. The ties that hold the rail together, you can go out and they're disintegrating. If you pick one up, it disintegrates. The equipment, the paint on the equipment, you can start, like yesterday we could notice the damage that is coming from all these environmental. It's not just that direct impact from the inundation of the water. It is all this environmental stuff that's happening as well. Like I said, we're losing trees, we're losing shrubbery. So it's yeah.
Yeah. To my discredit, I go out through that area a lot, and I've been to the museum a few times, but I have not been out since that. But I need to get out there and see that, just as you described that. So, how long was the museum closed to people coming and having patrons come out from when to when?
We closed on June 23rd, and we remained closed to the public all the way up until May of this year, the first weekend of May. However, we did still put on our Halloween event and our Christmas event. People were wanting that. So we did do that, although they were limited to where they could go for those events. The car shop building was heavily damaged, and we were able to get it back partially so Santa could have a place to be at. We did those two special events, but we also allowed people out there to come in and see the damage, kind of have that hard hat tour. I do want to mention that during the cleanup over that, 9 months, I would say, as bad as the flooding was in McCook Lake residents came to help us.
Oh, wow.
And Elk Point people came to help us. And then community theater people came. And we
to
did
be about
this,
a mile south on Riverside. Yeah.
Yeah. So and we shared back and forth. We were all in this together. The mayor came out to make sure how could the city help. I mean, he was the one elected official that came out to see. And again, his concern, which I give Mayor Scott a lot of credit, is what was the impact to the volunteers. Mm-hmm. Because they had invested so much over the years. How were they feeling? What could we do? And Recovery Iowa came out and sat up every weekend to make sure we could address some of the mental stresses.
Were your dealings with either federal, so it would be Federal Emergency Management Agency and any state agencies, were those positive interactions, would you say? Were things done helpfully?
The only one that we saw that visited us, the Railroad Museum, was FEMA. There was a group of 4 young people from FEMA that came out. They were in their late 20s. They were the most accommodating, most helpful people that I know. FEMA gets a lot of bad press, but these individuals, again, they said, we can't help you with anything with structures and that. There's just nothing for a nonprofit. But we want to know how your volunteers are. So they came out on a Saturday, and they spent time with our volunteers.
Okay. And Larry Obermeyer, was there thought with you and the board of directors that it's just too bad that we're going to give up, so to speak? That's kind of a terrible phrasing, but was there a thought of we just can't recover from this, or was it always we're going to do this?
It was always, we're going to do this. The volunteers themselves are the ones that, the minute we could get access onto the property, the cleanup started. And they worked around the clock. We did lose one volunteer who was very active in the cleanup. He passed away just shortly after Christmas from a heart attack. And he was there every day operating a tractor, cleaning up. So we dearly miss Rich, but the volunteers were, no, this isn't going to get us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so let's kind of spin it forward so you reopened in May. Last few questions, I guess, for this episode of What's the Frequency. What anecdotes did you hear from people over the time that it was closed and their hopes that, whatever they were saying to you in terms of getting back open?
What struck me personally, because I like to sit at our welcome center and greet everybody that comes in, is the ownership of the site that everyone had. I just kept hearing, this is our museum. We want it to come back, And now we're facing another hurdle of possibly $3 million worth of damage that's a year after the flood. Because when you look at the track structure and that infrastructure, you're looking at another $3 million to repair all of that. Our little train rides down because of the track is deteriorating so bad. So that is one thing that they do miss, is they miss the train rides out there. But they're very understanding as to why we can't do it right now. And it is the deterioration of that infrastructure.
Okay, so then the next question is, how have I guess, May, June, July, and August. So how have the 4 months gone in terms of traffic out there, and how you feel like the presentation of getting everything back to where it was, of the quality of the buildings and the grounds and such? How is it all sitting?
Our visitor traffic is up significantly. We're drawing a lot of individuals and travelers from foreign countries, and we've had visitors from almost 40 states now. We're well approaching around 27,000 visitors since early May. So we're very pleased as to how things are going with the visitor traffic returning.
Okay.
Our displays are back.
And then I guess final question here for you, for Larry Obermeyer. You talked a few minutes ago about annual events that people are used to going to, was Halloween event that you have, and then a Christmas event. As we tape this here in the last week of August, there was a second annual, and we read these on Siouxland Public Media to let people know that these are happening. So tell me about the second annual Spirits of Roundhouse Paracon. It's supposed to be a night of chills. I'm just reading from the press release. It's a night of thrills and chills with exploration of haunted history on this historic location. Paranormal enthusiast teams will be on hand, and there'll be other things as well. So how did it go, and what did you think of it all?
Our Paracon was put on by Para 911 of Sioux City, and they're kind of a group. I would say they're kind of a professional group that likes to work in the realm of paranormal and do investigations. They do a scientific based investigation. It's part of what we're aiming to do, and that's to immerse people into the story of this site. And paranormal may be just one of those tools that we help immerse people into the story of this site. We firmly believe that the land itself is trying to tell us a story with the archaeological record that we have now of over 6,000 artifacts that have been harvested from the site, and it's industrial archaeology. But paranormal as well is some of the incidences that they have found through their investigations. About 95% of them we have been able to use historical research to say, yes, something did happen around here. And of course, at many archaeological sites, you do have a paranormal activity that takes place with it as well. Like I saying, it's just part of this immersion into the story. And what we say out there, and this is why they called it the Spirits of the Roundhouse, is if you're coming out here expecting our site to be haunted, somebody touching you, scratching you, pushing things around, that's not what's happening out here. What the paranormal investigators will tell you is you have been invited into their world of work. And yes, it is hallowed ground. There have been at least 8 recorded worker deaths out there. The working on the railroad was very dangerous. It was hazardous. And many of the work, I mean, these 8 workers, you just have to remember that they're young to their mid-30s, early 40s. They came to work, and in seconds, they were gone.
Yeah.
Just because of the nature of the work that they were involved with. So it's kind of hopefully that we've been invited into their world, but they want their story told.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So do you think there'll be a third annual next year? Does it seem like this is going to be an annual event?
Yeah, with every event, we learn. Mm-hmm. They're already talking about the third event and things to do differently. What really amazed us was the actual investigation part on Saturday night drew about 50 people, which is an enormous size group. And again, they're not the geeky, black, dark type of person that's coming out to do the paranormal. Yeah. They're truly interested in finding the story.
Wow, that's very interesting. This has been such a good conversation, Larry. I really appreciate an hour or half hour plus to chat here. I'm always amazed at how you can explain things, and just the the breadth and depth of the knowledge that you have of Siouxland and everything. And a lot of people should know. Tell me, what was the Bob Scott honored you at a city council meeting a year or so ago? What was that for?
I received 2 honors for my work. I received the Treasurer of Sioux City Award for my work in historic preservation. I do a lot of things in historic preservation besides the Railroad Museum. But then I also received the Volunteer of the Year Award for the City of Sioux City in October.
Yeah.
But those awards belong to my co-volunteers. It's not me. It belongs to them, whether they're on the Sioux City Historic Preservation Commission or in the Railroad Museum. That's their award. And I'm just fortunate to accept it on behalf of them.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. And that'll be a wrap for this edition of What's the Frequency. Thanks much to my guest, Larry Obermeyer, being in studio here. Appreciate you, Larry. Larry is the Sioux City Railroad Museum president. We talked about the flooding that unfortunately impacted from the Big Sioux River, the museum in summer of 2024, and the bounce back that's been happening, and the most recent event out there with that we just talked about from this weekend. So thank you, Larry, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, for inviting me.
As we move deeper into a second year for this show, thanks for being a part of our station as we work every day to tell the stories about Siouxland that inform, entertain, and expand the mind. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week. What's the Frequency airs on Fridays at 10 a.m. and again on Sundays at 2 p.m. Make sure you also check out a few of our Siouxland Public Media music shows that air at 10 p.m. We have Hip Hop Chronicles on Thursdays, Mixtape Dance Party on Fridays with Earl Horlick, and 10 o'clock Blues on Saturdays with Stumpy Steve Smith. For Siouxland Public Media, I'm Brett Hayworth.